Here's what you're about to find out. How a photographer with no military background built this. The shot that made the rifle's reach impossible to ignore. Why every major military on Earth suddenly needed an answer. How a single round redefined what infantry could even attempt. A single rifle, fired from over a mile away, can disable a radar truck. It can put a helicopter on the ground without touching the pilot. It can end a mission before the enemy knows anyone is there. The Barrett M82 doesn't just reach farther than any infantry weapon before it. It reaches into a completely different category of warfare. This is a rifle so powerful that the U.S. Army initially didn't want it. A rifle built by one man in a garage in Tennessee with no military contract, no engineering degree, and no permission. So how does a self-taught gunsmith reshape modern conflict? To understand what the M82 changed, you need to understand the cartridge it fires. The .50 caliber BMG round was designed in 1918 by John Browning for a heavy machine gun. It was built to stop vehicles, not people. The bullet alone weighs nearly 42 grams. It leaves the barrel at over 900 meters per second. For 6 decades, that round existed only in crew-served weapons, machine guns bolted to jeeps or aircraft, things that took a team to operate. Nobody had ever made a rifle that one soldier could carry and fire that same cartridge. The physics alone seemed to rule it out. The recoil would wreck any conventional stock. The barrel would need to be enormous. Ronnie Barrett was a photographer in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. In 1982, he saw a .50 caliber machine gun mounted on a patrol boat and became fascinated. Not with the gun itself, with the idea that the round could be tamed into something portable. He had no formal engineering training. He taught himself to read technical drawings. He borrowed machining time on equipment he barely knew how to use. His first prototype took 2 years. He fired it from the back of a truck. It worked. The recoil management system he designed, a sliding barrel that absorbs the shock before it reaches the shooter, was something no one had tried in a shoulder-fired weapon at that scale. Barrett wasn't filling a military requirement. He was building something the military hadn't thought to ask for yet. The U.S. Army passed. So did the Marines. Barrett tried every branch and got the same answer. No requirement, no interest. So he did something unusual. He started selling to civilians. In the mid-1980s, the M82 was legal to own in most U.S. states. Competitive long-range shooters bought it. Gun collectors bought it. The rifle built a small but real commercial base before a single military contract existed. Then Sweden came calling. The Swedish Army placed an order in 1989, the first government contract Barrett ever received. It came from Europe, not America. The U.S. military took notice. Within months of the Swedish deal, American procurement offices that had ignored Barrett for years began asking for demonstrations. The civilian market had validated the weapon the Pentagon couldn't see a use for. The Gulf War in 1991 became the M82's first large-scale field test. The U.S. military placed an emergency order for over 100 rifles before the ground campaign began. Operators discovered almost immediately that the weapon's original purpose, anti-personnel sniping, was only a fraction of what it could do. Against Iraqi equipment, it was devastating in ways nobody had written into doctrine. Fuel trucks could be disabled from distances that kept the shooter completely out of effective return fire. Communications equipment, radar arrays, grounded aircraft, all of it became targetable by a single soldier with a rifle. The military term that emerged was hard target interdiction, not sniping. Interdiction. A one-person mission that previously required an airstrike or a full team. The doctrine shift ran deep. Before the M82, military planners had a clear line between infantry weapons and crew-served or air-delivered firepower. Infantry carried rifles effective to 300 or 400 meters. Anything beyond that required a different asset, a vehicle, a plane, a helicopter. The M82 erased that line. At 15, soldier could reliably engage hard targets. At over 2,000 meters with the right conditions, engagement was still possible. This compressed the planning cycle for special operations. Instead of coordinating an airstrike with its lead times, clearances, and risk of collateral damage, a team could place one shooter and achieve the same result quietly. Speed and silence became available at ranges that had never offered either before. Barrett refined the design through the 1990s. The M82A1 variant added a fluted barrel to reduce weight and manage heat. The muzzle brake, a device that redirects propellant gases to counter recoil, became larger and more effective. The total weight settled at around 14 kilograms unloaded. That's heavy. But operators accepted it because the alternative, calling in support, waiting for a window, hoping weather cooperated, cost time they often didn't have. The 10-round detachable box magazine meant a trained shooter could work through a target set quickly. The rifle's semi-automatic action, unusual for a weapon at this power level, allowed follow-up shots without breaking position. Other nations watched what American Special Forces were doing with it and placed their own orders. Then came Afghanistan. The terrain there rewrote every assumption about engagement distance. In the valleys of Kunar and Nuristan, fighters could operate from ridgelines at distances American standard rifles couldn't reach. The M4 carbine, the workhorse of U.S. forces, was effective to perhaps 500 meters in ideal conditions. In the mountains, contacts were happening at 800 meters, 1,000 meters, sometimes beyond. Units that had the M82 or its successor, the lighter N17, found themselves able to answer fire that other units simply had to absorb or maneuver against at great cost. The rifle stopped being a specialist's tool. It moved into broader infantry use than anyone at Barrett had originally planned for. The climax of the M82's story isn't a single battle. It's a morning in Kandahar province in 2002, the moment the rifle's reach became undeniable to everyone watching. A Canadian sniper team from the Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry was supporting American forces. Corporal Rob Furlong, using a Macmillan TAC-50, a Barrett competitor chambered in the same 50 BMG, engaged a target at 2,430 meters. At the time, it was the longest confirmed shot in history. The shot itself took a full 3 seconds to arrive. Wind, elevation, the curvature of the earth, all of it had to be calculated by hand. The fact that such a shot was even attempted reflected what the M82 generation had taught military planners, that the horizon was no longer a boundary, that a patient shooter with the right rifle owned the ground between himself and whatever he could see. That record held for 15 years. In 2017, a Canadian Joint Task Force 2 operator extended it to 3,540 meters using a Macmillan and 40 meters using a Macmillan TAC-50 again, the direct descendant of the platform Barrett helped legitimize. The Barrett M82 itself wasn't always the rifle setting these records, but Barrett built the proof of concept. Barrett proved that a man-portable 50 caliber weapon was viable, that training and equipment together could push engagement ranges into territory previously reserved for artillery. The records that came after were built on that foundation. Without the M82 demonstrating what was possible in the 1980s, the procurement decisions, the training programs, the doctrine, none of it exists in the same form. Over 60 countries now operate some variant of the Barrett platform, or a direct competitor it forced into existence. The British Lone 120 1A1 the German Gepard M1, the Russian KSVK. All of them emerged partly because NATO intelligence watched American forces in the Gulf and Afghanistan and understood that the battlefield now had a range problem. Armies that didn't answer it would be outmatched at standoff distances. The Mighty Two didn't just change American doctrine. It changed the procurement calculations of every serious military on. Each of those countries had to train snipers differently, plan operations differently, and think about cover and concealment at distances their previous doctrine had never considered. The civilian side of the story ran parallel and created its own controversy. In the United States, 50 BMG rifles remained legal to purchase in most states throughout the 1990s and 2000s. California banned them in 24, arguing the round could reach distances and penetrate materials that made it a public safety concern beyond normal sporting use. Barrett's response was immediate and public. He refused to sell to or service any California law enforcement agency. The company returned rifles already sent for repair. Barrett stated plainly that if the state didn't trust its citizens with the weapon, his company wouldn't arm the state's agents with it either. It was a confrontational position that made Barrett as much a political figure as a gunmaker. The Mighty Two also found its way into conflicts where no one expected it. Ukrainian forces used Barrett rifles in the Donbas conflict, beginning in 2014. Syrian opposition groups acquired them through various supply chains. The Islamic State captured several from overrun positions. A weapon designed in a Tennessee garage was now in the hands of a dozen different factions across 3 continents. Barrett had limited control over where the rifles ended up once governments distributed them. This is the standard problem of any widely adopted military technology. The rifle exists in the world now, and the world is not organized. Ronnie Barrett's company is still in Murfreesboro. It employs hundreds of people. The Mighty Two is still in production, alongside newer variants designed for different roles and calibers. Barrett himself has been recognized by multiple defense organizations and has spoken at military institutions about the relationship between private innovation and national defense. The company he started with no contract and no credentials has outlasted dozens of firms that had both. What makes the Mighty Two's story unusual isn't just the weapon, it's the path. A civilian product that preceded its military application. A commercial market that validated a capability the military hadn't requested. A single designer who saw something in a machine gun bolt on a patrol boat and spent 2 years in a garage figuring out how to change what a single soldier could do. The Barrett Mighty Two is now over 40 years old. It has been fielded in every major American conflict since the Gulf War. It reshaped sniper doctrine, forced competing nations to reconsider engagement ranges, and proved that the most consequential military innovations don't always come from defense laboratories or government programs. Sometimes they come from a person who simply couldn't stop thinking about a problem. The rifle that nobody asked for became the rifle that everyone needed. Whether a private citizen should be able to own a weapon with those capabilities, and what responsibility a manufacturer carries once a design is loose in the world, that's still an open question. Where do you stand on it? Tell me in the comments.